Hi, welcome back to another Serger tip clip. I've done a couple of tip clips about gathering, but I'm excited to show you a new foot and how it gathers a little bit differently than the standard foot. And I've run off a few samples to show you, and I have another fun little tip for tightening up your gathers. This tote bag has 4 gathered strips on it to either side of the center panel. And I wanted nice, tight, even gathers. So this new foot is perfect for doing that. I want to do a little comparison for you on these strips. Each one of these started off as a 45-inch flat strip of fabric, and it's probably just a little bit lighter than a quilting weight cotton, not too much, but it is 45 inches long. This strip I gathered with the standard foot, and it looks very nice, but I'm going to show you a little bit of a difference. I don't know, I'm going to have the camera come in close to take a look at the edges where the stitching is, and when you gather with the differential feed raised with the standard foot, it makes little poufs, I call them, underneath the stitching. And on this one, I'm using the new Shirring foot. And if you look closely at the difference under the stitching, and we'll do a close-up shot to compare them, it makes more like a pleat. And I think that the Shirring foot gives more even pleats going from side to side, which is kind of nice. Again, I've used my standard foot for a long time with this, but I really love this new foot, so I want you to be aware of it. And I'll show you a comparison of it compared to the standard foot. And then, the gathering on this, as I said, started off with the strip flat, 45 inches, and with the standard foot, it gathered to be about 27.5 inches, almost exactly half the length of the starting one. And on this one with the new Shirring foot, it gathered a little bit more and went down to 24.5 inches. So it does gather a little bit more on the first run. But then here is the way I like to see it finished off. And if you need tighter gathers for that, I think you'll love this part of the tip clip. I'll show you how to do this. Next, I'd like to do a comparison of the feet. I have both feet out. This is the original standard foot, and this is the new Shirring foot. And they look exactly the same from the top. In fact, if you're wondering what this is, what the blue blob is, I put that on so that I could quickly differentiate the two. So the difference, though, is on the back of the foot, the bottom of the foot. So this is the standard foot, and you can see it's completely flat. This is the Shirring foot, and here's the difference. It has this little raised area. It looks like it's lowered when it's upside down, but it's a little raised area. And that allows that little pleat in the gathering to form. So it's a very subtle difference, but it does such a nice job on gathering the fabric. And we'll go to the machine and see it, and I'll show you my other little trick at the machine. Let me give you the machine setup first. For gathering, I'm set up for a 4-thread overlock, and I have white thread in. This isn't a very colorful setup for the camera, but I wanted the light color so that you could see the little pleats under the stitching. If you have a baby lock with a stitch selector, I am on A for the 4-thread overlock. I've cranked up my differential feed to 2 so that the front feed dogs are working twice as fast as my back feed dogs to gather up that fabric. And I have both needles in, right and left overlock. And I have my stitch length at about 3.5. You can go anywhere 3.5 to 4 for your stitch length. But one thing that I did was I narrowed down my stitch as narrow as I could make it by bringing in that stitch finger as close to the needles as I could. Because if you're doing anything that has a 1/4 inch seam allowance, you don't want the full width of that gathering stitch with the 4-thread overlock, because it might peek out from the seams. It'll be wider than that 1/4 inch. So I do have that narrowed down. So, and I have my knife activated. So on this first pass, we're going to go down both long edges and gather it up once, and then I'll show you how to tighten up those gathers. I'm going to trim off about 1/8 of an inch, and I'm working from the side of the machine, so I might not be absolutely perfect on this, but I'll do my very best. It's always easier, obviously, if you're sitting directly in front of your machine. But I'm just going to take my time. And as I'm looking, I'm basically lining up the edge of the fabric with the edge of the machine right here as my visual guide. But whatever works for you for a guide is fine. And you notice I'm not putting any pressure on this. I'm just using my right hand as a guide for this, but my left hand is not putting any pressure on the fabric. I don't want to work against that higher differential feed setting. Side one is complete. I'm going to do the second side the same way, but look at those pretty little pleats that it makes along the edge. It's just a really pretty finished appearance when you're using that shearing foot. I love it. So I'm going to go down the second side, doing the exact same thing, cutting off about 1/8 of an inch, hopefully, and I'll see you right back here. One thing I wanted to mention, just as a little tip, when you're going down the second side, if you've already gathered the first side, you can see how the fabric curls off to the left. So to keep the fabric nice and even as you're trimming off, or keep the amount that you're trimming off even, I'm looking closer toward the front of the foot, toward the toe of the foot, and just keeping this edge as even with the edge of the fabric as, or with the edge of the machine as possible, rather than this whole front piece, because it is curled. And just take your time on that second pass and it'll make it easier. So I'll finish up the second side and I'll be right back. I've done both sides with the new shearing foot, and this one measures right now about 25, but I want to tighten up those gathers, but I really don't feel like pulling the needle threads to do it, because then I have to make sure everything is nice and even. I'll show you a really efficient, great way to do that. And what I'm going to do is lock my knife. I'm going to disengage it. You can see, I think you can see how it went down. It's right here. When I stitch, you won't see the knife come up. It won't cut the edge. So I'm going to run both sides through a second time. But the reason I don't want to clip these stitches is because the knife is in front of where the needles are stitching. And if I cut the stitches as I go, it's going to re-flatten out those pretty gathers again, and I don't want to do that. So I'm just going to run this through one more time. And what I'm going to do now, since I'm not cutting off anything, you can see this little shiny part of the machine bed right here. And I'm going to use the edge of the shiny part as my guide for this, because I don't need to have it over for where the knife would have trimmed off. And I'm just going to run this through a second time and you'll see the difference in the gathering. And again, I just want to be very light fingers, light hands, and not pulling or putting any pressure on the fabric at all as I go through. So I've got the edge lined up with that shiny part. And if you don't have, if your the bed of your machine looks a little bit different than this, just find some sort of a landmark to the left of where your knife would be cutting off. And even if you want to put a little piece of tape there or something like that to mark the edge for your edge of your fabric to follow, that'll work just fine. And on this, I really just take my time just to guide it along, just to make sure that I don't go off track too far. Can you see how the edge is just lined up right there? Let me get that little thread tail out of the way. Chain off. I'm going to clip the thread. So let me just show you the difference from side to side. Oops, let me just give it another little clip. So here it is gathered up twice, and you can see the difference in the length. You can see how it kind of curls around because this side is longer. It's only gone through once. So I'm going to do the second side as well. I've run both sides through twice, and you can see how pretty the pleating, or not the pleating, actually the gathering is. The little pleats are on the side. But what I like to do before I insert this into a seam is I just take my thumb and finger and smooth out those little gathers on this. But now this measures about 17 inches long. So it's gone from the original flat length of 45 down to about 17. And that's with the differential feed on 2. Now on both passes of this, I had my differential feed on 2, and that was what I wanted for the look of this. However, if on your first pass you wanted to tighten up your gathers just a little bit more, you can just lock your blade and turn your differential feed, just bring it back down a couple of notches, and you may have to make a couple of sample runs on scrap fabric to get it exactly right. But if you have it on your differential feed on 2 for the first run, and then even if you brought it down to 1.5, it wouldn't gather as tightly as what I did today, but it would tighten up those gathers a little bit more than for just the first run. So that's just a one little thing that I wanted to mention. Thanks for joining me today. And if you have the shearing foot, have fun with it and experiment and see what you like for a finished look on your fabrics. And don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel, and I'll see you again soon.